The purpose of this NAT 1780 screencast is to describe the formation of the ozone layer back from the earliest days in the histories of our planet, and also to talk about the evolution of the temperature profile for our planet, which had a lot in common, a lot of shared history, if you like, with the formation of the ozone layer. So we'll start off by taking you back to the Hadean eon, that period in Earth's history that starts around 3.8 billion years ago and goes right back to the earliest days in the formation of the planet at around 4.6 billion years ago, a time when the planet was very active from a volcanic perspective, and as a result, we will try and illustrate here a very simple artist's depiction of a volcano that's introducing into the atmosphere, injecting into the atmosphere, if you like, various kinds of volcanic materials, including ash, including various gases, as we've discussed in other components of the course. There's during this time frame in the Hadean eon. So we'll just write that down here as well. There is no atmosphere to speak of, and as a result, radiation that's incident on the planet from the sun, and we'll try and introduce an artist's depiction of the sun here. Not a particularly good depiction. I'm sure we can do a little bit better than that. Let's try. So here we have the sun. Obviously not the scale, quite distant from the planet, and uh, you know, basically directing ultraviolet radiation towards the surface of the planet. In addition to radiation in other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, but the ultraviolet's the critical one for our discussion here. So initially, back in this Hadean time frame, there is no atmosphere to speak of, and as a consequence, the ultraviolet radiation incident upon the surface of the planet makes its way all the way down to the surface of the planet, and this is why we've talked about life in the very simple life forms in the oceans as being the initial likely place where life started on the planet. So back in this particular time frame, if you were to construct a temperature profile for the planet, so we'll use this as the sort of base level from an altitude perspective, and we'll chart off altitude here in the vertical sense. And again, I think we can probably produce a slightly better line than that. Let's try that again. So we'll have altitude. Okay, didn't do a very good job there either. You can tell I'm kind of new to this particular tool, uh, this way of producing screencasts. So anyway, we'll try and do that again. That's a little bit better. So we'll have altitude being indicated here in the vertical sense. Try and spell it a little bit more accurately. So ALT for altitude being marked off in the vertical, and then temperature in actually it would be more customary from a science perspective to record temperature in units of Kelvin on the horizontal axis. Even though we haven't really spoken at any great length as to what kelvins are, but temperature increasing from left to right in the horizontal sense. So, given this very simple kind of view, we've got a hot planet that is literally, um, uh, material is emerging from the inside of the planet. We have incident radiation that can be potentially absorbed and re-emitted in the infrared part of the electromagnetic spectrum as well on this planet, and as a result, probably the temperature profile for a scenario like this would be one where we have essentially a single layer of the atmosphere in which temperature decreases with height. And so maybe we'll just make a note of that here. So temperature decreases with height or altitude, whatever you want to call it there. So that's what this particular sloped line is showing in this representation, a temperature decrease with height. So when upwards to the left, slope is indicating a decrease with height. And so this, we have, as I say, a basically a single atmospheric layer, because in the case of Earth's atmosphere, we actually define the vertical structure of Earth's atmosphere on the basis of temperature changes. And in this case, we really don't have a change. We just have a steady, a systematic decrease of temperature with height. So what I'd like to do now is actually introduce the earliest appearance of an ozone layer. So we figure that the first appearance of an ozone layer uh, must have happened sometime after the end of the Hadean era, Hadean eon. The planet has started to cool down, and just for simplicity, I'll redraw this without a volcanic structure. So I've redrawn the surface of the planet at some time in the after the end of the Hadean period. Planets has started to cool down. We have abundant oceans. We have photosynthesis being carried out by anaerobic organisms in the ocean, and the percolation of oxygen from the oceans out from the oceans into the atmosphere. And the presence of oxygen in Earth's early atmosphere is actually a precondition for the production of ozone, because as we discussed in other parts of the course, you actually oxygen is required as an ingredient, if you like, as a reactant that participates in a chemical reaction where known as photolysis, where the molecular oxygen O2 gets broken apart into atomic oxygen, and then atomic oxygen can combine with another molecular oxygen to produce the ozone molecules. So basically, oxygen O2 results in the production of ozone O3. So this is the post-Hadean time frame. We'll label this as sometime in the Archean eon, and possibly continuing on into the Proterozoic eon as well. So basically, sometime after about 3.8 billion years ago to probably about 600 million years before the present time. So basically, during this time frame, it's theorized that an ozone layer was first developed, and we think that it probably was developed actually quite close to the surface of the planet. So I'll just use a little bit of shading here. Actually, I don't want to use yellow. I want to use a different color. And so this kind of bluish shading here is supposed to depict the initial formation of the ozone layer. All right, very close to the surface. So what does this actually do to the temperature profile for the planet? That's one of the very interesting consequences of starting to produce ozone. So over here on the right, I'm going to redraw our diagram that allows us to depict temperature profiles. We'll try and draw it with a slightly more steady hand, a little bit better. That's still not very good. Clearly some dexterity lessons are required. All right, it's a little better. It'll have to do. So we have temperature again in Kelvin on the horizontal axis here. That's a little bit better. Increasing from left to right, and again, altitude increasing vertically here. So what we had in the Hadean time period was a temperature profile where temperature decreased in a very, very systematic way with height. And what's interesting now about the introduction of ozone is that the production reactions for ozone, as you may recall from some of our discussions during the lectures and so on, the production reactions for ozone are such that they actually release heat. They're what are called exothermic chemical reactions. So they actually release heat energy as the reactions take place. So we actually believe that this kind of reaction has the effect of warming up the planet. So probably the production of ozone in the earliest phases, shown here as being close to the surface, resulted in slightly warmer temperature profiles. So you can see here what I've drawn in blue is this just shown here is this very small little kink in the temperature profile that is trying to indicate to you a slight warming. I'm going to draw it again. A slight warming in the temperature profile with height. So we have in this new area where ozone is being produced, we have a small region where there's a slope that is slightly upwards and to the right. And this is a region where temperature increases with height. Now, what we also believe happened basically during this same time period, and again, of course, the timing on this is all speculative because it's not as if anybody was around to actually chart any of this, but we actually think that during this same period that the ozone layer continued to develop, and that's what I'm going to try and illustrate here. I just have to reconstruct our diagram here. So again, we've got our reference temperature profile, temperature decreasing with height, and what I want to do now is illustrate a growing ozone layer. And so we'll go ahead and do that again, showing it in blue, and we'll just assume that the ozone layer continued to grow. I'm going to make it quite a bit bigger now just to help really exaggerate this for the purpose of the diagram. So this whole region here now is our growing ozone layer, and let me go ahead and just label it as such. So this is our ozone layer. Again, it's thickening and it's still close to the surface. All right. So the impact of this particular layer again gets felt. So I'm going to kind of trace the top of this layer. So now we actually have, notice that we have actually a two-layer atmosphere. Some kind of a layer that's got a fairly ozone-rich layer, and then above it a layer that is evolving in terms of the other gases that we've talked about as well. So this presence of the ozone layer and the fact that there are exothermic chemical reactions taking place here again result in a temperature profile that gets somewhat modified during this particular time frame in the evolution, the early evolution, if you like, of the planet. Okay, and then basically moving forward from here, and again, really the time frames are a little bit hard to establish here. But then beyond this time, we have further development of the ozone layer, and I'll show you that on another cartoon in just a moment. Just before I get to that, let me go back to the previous slide and just remind you of what was going on in the Hadean period. We have the sun producing radiation in all basically all components of the electromagnetic spectrum. We focused in on ultraviolet radiation because that's a critically important one. Now as we move into the Archean and Proterozoic time period, we still have the sun producing radiation, And so we'll reintroduce the sun here, and then we'll also um, illustrate the radiation, ultraviolet radiation. And here the key thing is that the ozone layer serves actually to block the radiation. That back in this previous diagram, this ultraviolet radiation would have traveled and penetrated right down to the surface of the planet. The creation of the ozone layer, ozone has the capacity to absorb ultraviolet radiation, one might say with extreme prejudice. So this ozone layer that started to develop here close to the surface also serves as you can think of it as almost being like a barrier to ultraviolet radiation. It does not allow ultraviolet radiation to penetrate all the way to the surface of the planet. So this is, of course, extremely important in um, the evolution of life on the surface of the planet, because prior to the existence of this ozone layer, basically all life has been limited to existing within the hydrosphere component of the early Earth. And so we believe that the creation of this ozone layer somewhere around this Archean Proterozoic time frame is absolutely crucial to the ability for life to actually make its way out onto the surface of the planet. In this particular part of the screencast, I want to pick up the whole discussion on the formation of the ozone layer, basically at some time frame that's probably around 600 or so million years to the basically the present time. So let me just go ahead and indicate that. So sort of less than or equal to approximately 600 million years. So basically from the late Proterozoic to more or less the geologically speaking relatively recent times. So in this particular diagram, again, we have the surface of the planet, and let me also indicate, as I've done before, the presence of the ozone layer. And the curious thing about the ozone layer is now that it's actually displaced quite substantially from the surface of the planet. In fact, we'll be a little bit more precise, but at some point, that ozone layer that initially formed close to the surface of the planet and then gradually thickened as more and more oxygen became available as a result of photosynthesis initially within the oceans and then ultimately for life on land. That ozone layer continued to thicken, and at some point, although the mechanism is not particularly clear, that ozone layer actually moved from being close to the surface to, in fact, being much farther away from the surface. So again, we'll just depict the ozone layer, the sun, the plentiful ultraviolet radiation incident upon this ozone layer, which has, as I say, has thickened and now is at an altitude of about 25, whoops, 25 kilometers or so in terms of where it is in terms of altitude of Earth's atmosphere. So basically, more or less, at its present day location. And again, because ozone has the capacity to absorb particularly effectively radiation in the ultraviolet part of the spectrum, what that means is that this radiation gets absorbed in this particular layer within the planet and does not make its way all the way down to the surface. And as a consequence, as we get into this late Proterozoic time frame and kind of getting closer and closer to the present, we have a very capable, a very hospitable environment, if you like, for the development of foliage, and so the flora and the fauna is able to be introduced in this particular time frame with a very nice uh, ozone layer that's providing ample protection. So again, let's draw the temperature profile, temperature being accounted for in Kelvin, which is the common thing to do, and altitude. We can actually, in fact, this time we can actually indicate a scale for altitude, as we're going to have a couple of indications here of altitude. So we'll use altitude in kilometers, increasing from bottom to top, and showing that here. And in fact, I think what we'll also do is maybe we'll even extend the axis here for altitude up a little bit higher on the in the vertical sense, and because that will also serve some of our purposes as we talk about what's happened in terms of the development of a layered atmospheric structure. So basically, if we now again let's trace across the kind of the thickness of this ozone layer. And what I'm trying to show here now is essentially that that ozone reaches its maximum levels of concentration at an altitude of about 25 kilometers, which of course we understand today to be the present day stratosphere of the planet. And in fact, what we see in this particular case is that in this particular region of of the planet, the so-called stratosphere, we have temperature increasing with height. And try and draw that a little bit better. So basically, a slope of upwards to the right is an indication of temperature increasing with height. And again, it's the chemical reactions involving ozone that are responsible for this. Now, below the stratosphere, the modern day stratosphere, in the troposphere, we still have a case where temperature decreases with height. So the profile looks considerably more like that, again, to some artist depiction. And then, in fact, as you get above the stratosphere, we end up with temperature again decreasing with height. So this middle region here, which in the modern Earth is around basically, if you look in your textbook as a reference, the stratosphere starts at around 11 kilometers or so, and ends at about just shy of 50 kilometers. That's basically the region that we refer to as being the stratosphere. Let me see if we can just write that in here for you. And then down below, this is also definitely not to scale. Down here below, we have this lowest part of the planet closest to the surface that we call the troposphere. And if everything were to scale, basically the top of the troposphere would be around 11 or so kilometers. The top of the stratosphere is more around 49 or so kilometers. So you can see the stratosphere is quite a thick layer, and there's a transition between these regions. So once again, in the troposphere, basically, as you can see here, the slope of this temperature versus height profile is such that it slopes upwards and to the left. And that means that basically through the entire troposphere, on average, temperature decreases with height. In the stratosphere, in contrast to that, where we have these exothermic production reactions involving ozone taking place, you can see that we have a region where the slope is upwards and to the right. And that is indeed where temperature is increasing with height in this region here. So you can see that to be the case. Okay, so let's go ahead and sum up what we've discussed here. We started off by talking about the Hadean eon, where we have no atmosphere to speak of. The surface of the planet is very hot. There's a tremendous amount of volcanic activity. There's incident solar radiation that's also contributing, probably at this point in Earth's history, in a fairly minor way to the heat at the surface, being overwhelmed by the volcanic activity that's making an impression on the surface of the planet. And as a result, we believe that during this Hadean eon, roughly speaking, temperature would be decreasing with altitude, as we're showing in on the right here in this particular diagram. If we then go ahead and move forward to uh, somewhere probably starting in the Archean eon and then extending well into the towards the end of the Proterozoic, what we find is that the oxygen that has been produced in oceans by anaerobic organisms that are able to carry out photosynthesis, that oxygen that has in some sense made its way into the early atmosphere, can then be converted into ozone, in fact involving ultraviolet radiation. And that activity, that those chemical reactions likely started to take place very, very close to the surface of the planet where the oxygen was available and where ultraviolet radiation was able to penetrate. And that combination led to the production of an ozone layer. As more oxygen was added to the atmosphere during this particular time frame, that ample supply, that increasing supply of oxygen means an increasing supply as well of oxygen to be photolized and to be therefore able to produce ozone. So the ozone layer, which continued to likely remain close to the surface of the planet during this time frame, also thickened. The the effect of the exothermic reactions that produce ozone, that heat, additional heat generation, uh, basically resulted in a modification of the temperature profile that you can see here at the right, where as the ozone gets introduced, it literally warms the lower, this new lower emerging lower layer of the atmosphere. So we have also for the first time a bit of structure to the atmosphere in terms of a temperature profile. And then beyond this time frame, if we look finally at the last 600 million years or so, at some point that ozone layer continued to develop as again more oxygen became available. The ozone layer, as you can see here, has the ability to absorb ultraviolet radiation, and through a mechanism that we haven't really got a terrific handle on, that ozone layer also migrated, if you like, from being close to the surface of the planet to more or less its present location, up some with the peak in concentration existing around about 25 kilometers in terms of altitude of the planet. The the ozone layer, where it existed at some time in the last 600 million years and basically to modern times, continues to function in the way that we've been describing. It has the ability to continue to absorb ultraviolet radiation, and that radiation, some of that radiation is involved in splitting apart and dissociating molecular oxygen, such that we have atomic oxygen able to combine with molecular oxygen and continue to produce ozone that's now become quite localized to this region of the atmosphere that we this layer of the atmosphere that we know today as the stratosphere. And those exothermic reactions involving the production of ozone are what are primarily responsible for the fact that in the stratosphere temperature is increasing with height, and that's why the blue part of the curve that I'm showing you here in this particular diagram is in fact a region where temperature is increasing with height. And so I'll just circle that for emphasis for you. So this region here, temperature increasing with height, a slope, a positive slope if you like, a slope of upwards and to the right. That region there is where we have the production of ozone giving rise to a warming effect, and as a result, completely modifying the temperature profile. So in fact, it's these changes in temperature, these patterns of variations in temperature with altitude that we use as the basis for describing the vertical structure of Earth's atmosphere. And that completes our screencast.